Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate. This is going to be a fun one, folks, as we are going to debate whether or not the current lockdowns should be completely abandoned. So we will let the debaters clarify exactly where they're coming from. But first, I want to say, if it's your first time here, consider hitting that subscribe button as we have many more debates to come. We're very excited. For example, on the bottom right of your screen, you'll see Matt Dillahunty and Dr. Randall Rouser will be facing off with their teammates along with them in a tag team on whether or not there is sufficient evidence for God this Friday. So it should be a lot of fun. And with that, I want to let you know we are going to have Destiny kind of taking the lead today and just kind of laying out his basic case. And then Kay will also explain where she is coming from, and then we'll go into open conversation. If you have a question, feel free to fire it into the old live chat, and it'll help me just to be sure I get every question in the Q&A list if you tag me with @ModernDayDebate. And you can, of course, do a super chat, in which case you can not only ask a question, but make a comment toward one of the speakers that they would, of course, get a chance to respond to. And we ask that you be your regular friendly selves in case you do that. And it'll also, super chat will push your question to the top of the list. So we're pumped to get started. And so thanks so much to our guests for being here. It's a true pleasure to have you guys. So yeah, just first I want to say thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Pleasure is all ours. And so we'll roll it over to Destiny to get the ball rolling.
Wait, is this if we should open the country right now, or is if we ever should have had a lockdown? Can we clarify?
That's a great question. So I guess I'll let Kay, if you have wherever you're coming from. Exactly.
I think it was for the current lockdown ending, right?
Yeah, that's kind of where the gist that I got, because I was actually in favor of it. I wasn't against the initial lockdown. So I think that to clarify where we're coming from, I think should the lockdowns that we have end right now?
Okay. I'm so sorry. I don't know if we're going to disagree much on this. I'll try my best. So my understanding was that I think the plan that was prepared with assistance from the CDC or the NIH was that we were looking for like a downward trajectory of COVID-like or influenza-like symptoms or illnesses reported within a 2-week period, I think is what they were looking for. I don't know if downward trajectory just means like everything looks like it's starting to go down, or if that means like every day has to have less than the previous ones. I think they're just looking for like the downward trajectory. It seems like we see that, to my understanding, unless there are a ton of unreported cases, it seems like we are on the downward trajectory. And then as long as hospitals are being able to treat everybody without having to do like, it's called like crisis intervention, I think, without having to like resort to that. And then as long as we have like robust testing measures in place such that we're accurately testing people so we have like an idea of who's infected where, if all of these qualifications are being met, which I'm pretty sure the first two are, the downward trajectory of symptoms, the idea that hospitals, I think, are working at like under capacity now. It seems like the testing is the only thing we're kind of lagging behind on. But I mean, on a state-by-state level, as soon as these things are happening, I would probably be in favor of ending the lockdown in those states.
You got it. Thanks so much. We'll kick it over to Kay.
I think that Stephen's probably pretty right on that. I don't know if we're going to have a whole lot to debate on this issue, because I think that he's pretty spot on. I mean, we're seeing a downward trajectory in the numbers. We're seeing all of these different things that are being met, and the goalposts are continually being moved. You know, we locked the country down state by state under the directive, the suggestions that Donald Trump gave to the country, because we didn't know what we were dealing with. And, you know, consistently what they were telling us to expect wasn't accurate, and the numbers were smaller and smaller, and the death rate was lower and lower and lower. And now that we kind of have a better idea of what we're looking at, I think we're doing more harm to our country than good by keeping it locked down and keeping people in their homes where, you know, their immune systems are weakening, and not to mention the economic problems that we're facing with the continued lockdown. So I'm very much in favor. I think that it's a much better idea for us to start the reopening processes at a much faster pace than we are now, so that we can save what is left of our economy. That's pretty much where I stand.
Yeah, wow. What a horrible opinion. Oh, man. Okay, I remember I remember from the email, the reason why I thought we might have more disagreement is because I'm pretty sure one of the things you emailed back to me was that you thought that the entire pandemic was way overblown. What do you mean, I guess, when you say that exactly?
I think that, I mean, I don't know if I want to use the term overblown. I think that the mainstream media has a tendency to want to cause mass panic. They kind of feed off of it. It's kind of their jobs. It makes their job easier whenever they have something to feed into. But I think that because this was a new virus, we didn't know what we were dealing with. And so the initial response whenever it came to the United States was just mass panic. And, this is what we're expecting to see. And it turns out that, it was not nearly as bad as they expected it to be, but the mainstream media kind of picked that up and ran with it and continued to run with it, even whenever the numbers did not support that narrative, just to keep people scared and keep people inside and, just to control what people were thinking. And you control what people are thinking through fear, you can control what they're doing as well.
Okay, so I don't know if I'm fully buying this. I mean, like, it was definitely something that was worth, like, dramatic action against, right? Like, despite the fact that we basically destroyed our country for like months, we still saw like 100,000 people die. Who knows how bad it could have been otherwise? Like, it seems like this had a pretty big impact on countries around the world. I don't think that, like, it almost sounds like we're kind of saying that a lot of the fears or a lot of the problems with this were kind of invented by the media, but I mean, it feels like it was a real thing, no?
No, it was definitely a real situation. I mean, look what happened in Italy. I mean, it just wiped through that country. It was awful. But I think that our response to this could have been better, and maybe we could have saved ourselves from such a dramatic economic decline if we had a better handle on this. I think that, silver lining from this whole thing is that we realized how grossly underprepared America was for something way worse than this, something as bad as they expected it to be. We really need to get our preparedness for an actual, the new bubonic plague to come to America, because we were grossly underprepared for what was happening here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to disagree at all that we could have handled this a million times better, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily agree that the media completely overhyped it, but I mean, to some extent, of course, the media wants more sensationalist stories, so the coverage is going to be a little bit extreme. It was one of my big complaints early on, is because, like, I try to be responsible with my messaging, but, like, after this, swine flu and H1N1 and Ebola, like, I kind of wondered, like, is this actually a thing at all? But I mean, it seems like it was a pretty big deal, right, in different countries around the world. Yeah. You got to throw some gasoline into the fire. Modern day debate. What do you got?
Well, I am curious. It's a topic we were going to do tomorrow, but you guys, I have a feeling you may disagree. We're going to have on Destiny's old buddy, JF, is going to be on tomorrow. And basically, I am curious, maybe you guys would agree or disagree on whether or not the current riots are justified.
Oh, boy.
Well, first we have to be very careful on what do we mean by current riots. What do you mean by that? Or actually, but rather than asking for clarification, what I would say is that, like, I think that political violence is definitely justifiable, 100%. But I think it's important who the targets are. So, like, if people wanted to go out and, like, set fire to police stations or cruisers, or, tear down, like, public institutions or whatever, I think that's fair. But when people start, like, attacking local businesses and stuff, or individuals, I'm not in favor of that. I don't think that's justifiable. Violence against the state, and I'm guessing with the libertarian here, I might not find much disagreement in that. Violence against the state, I think, for sure, is justifiable. Violence against like individuals or business owners, I don't think that's very justifiable. But yeah, that would be my position.
Gotcha. And Kay, if you don't feel like you've like really read into it enough to take a strong stance, that's okay. We've totally changed gears, and so.
I definitely. I mean, for anybody that follows me on Twitter, I mean, I'm definitely going to lose some more followers after this, because I've lost plenty on voicing my opinions on this situation. I am 100% in agreement with Stephen on this one. I think, I was 100% in support, and I lost a lot of, right-wing followers whenever I said I 100% support the fact that they're trying to set fire to the police station of the police station where that cop worked that killed George Floyd. 100% support them burning the police cruisers. I think that, whenever it comes to systematic oppression, that peaceful protesting only goes so far. And whenever it's a life or death situation, I fully agree that, violence against the state can fully be justified. They lost my support, unfortunately, whenever they started looting and burning down private businesses, especially because, the messaging got lost so much because a lot of these businesses were Black-owned businesses. These are, majority, like minority Black communities that they're completely destroying. And it's unfortunate that, there's this very large narrative forming of, white kids coming into minority communities, burning it down, completely destroying it, and then they go back to their more wealthy communities, and the messaging is lost. But up until that point, you want to set fire to police stations, you want to set fire to things, you want to set fire to police cruisers, I'm all for that, because, you can say peaceful protesting, is the way to go, but the reality is that Black people have been peacefully protesting police violence since the civil rights movement, and they only started doing that after the civil rights movement because the civil rights movement gave them the equal ability to peacefully protest. So this was happening way before that, and nothing's changing, nothing's being done. So whenever they're finally like, I've had enough, and they go after the institutions that have been oppressing them for hundreds of years, I'm going to sit back. I'm not going to lose sleep over cop cars and police precincts burning.
Gotcha. One we may have. I had heard, now I think I remember, Kay, you're not actually a fan of Trump, and I might be wrong, but we have to bring him up. Destiny's favorite politician. So maybe we bring up Trump, and in particular, curious to know if you thought that he's handled the pandemic well, or it could be the riots.
Well, the pandemic was our original topic, so I mean, I can talk about either. I don't care. Again, I'm not sure how much disagreement we're going to find. I mean, obviously, the pandemic was handled absolutely horribly. Even in the recent weeks, I think Fauci said that he basically has had no communication with Trump over the past couple of weeks. Going into the pandemic, we did the China travel ban pretty early on, and then we just kind of sat on our asses for 5 or 6 weeks doing literally nothing when we should have been mass preparing tests that actually worked. We should have been massively preparing PPE and stocking hospitals and stuff. We should have done the European travel ban probably a lot sooner than we did. But I mean, even people always focus on the travel bans, but I don't even think those are the most important responses. I think the most important response was we were going to have this disease to some extent in our country, and rather than having Trump constantly and consistently downplaying it, he probably should have said okay guys, we need to get our testing shit worked out because it's going to be here, so let's be ready for it, rather than oh, we have 2 cases, who cares? Oh, we have 16 cases, who cares? Well, if 100,000 or 200,000 die, it's not a big deal, right? It's holy shit, the expectations for that changed pretty radically over a few weeks. I would say that was really botched.
Yeah, I would absolutely 100% agree with that. I mean, I get a lot of heat from my Trump supporting followers because I'm very, very critical of Donald Trump. I have been since the 2016 election, and I will continue to be as long as he is in the White House. But I don't think that this was handled very well. And, unfortunately, I'm not a politician, and people always want me to express how I thought that he could have handled it better. I don't know exactly what I would do in that situation as president, as, leader in chief. But I think consistently Trump's arrogance gets in the way of him taking actual action, presidential action. I will say that I think he handled the coronavirus better than he's handling the riots right now.
Jesus.
Gotcha. And another one that's recently someone had asked, they said they wanted to debate, and this I feel like it's a libertarian, I think the temperament of libertarians leads them to take this position, but Kay, you can clarify, I might be wrong, and I feel like friends who lean to the left usually have a different feeling about this. In particular, is a crime worse if it was racially motivated or not? So for example, in the recent tragic case where the gentleman was choked, suffocated to death, is if this was racially motivated, rather than just a case of police brutality that perhaps that white cop would have done to a white person. I'm not saying that's the case, I'm just saying theoretically. If it were the case that it was racially motivated, is it worse? And this may kind of, it also kind of maybe falls back on whether or not you're a consequentialist or deontologist, but I'm curious to hear your answers.
Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first? I don't care.
You can go ahead.
Okay. I don't know if I would necessarily say that it makes a crime worse, just that it makes it different, meaning it needs like a different, it needs like a different prescription, a different solution. Like if my kid was walking around a playground, and he punched, you know, like 2 people in the face, and he just did it because he wanted to punch 2 people, like my solution for that problem is going to be different than if my kid was walking around the playground and he punched 2 girls because he hates women, right? Like both of these are bad things. Arguably they're the same, like both of them are punching people, but the source of the problem is way different, meaning the solution is going to have to be way different when addressing it. It gets kind of weird to say, like, is it worse to murder somebody because they're black or because they're gay or just because you're pissed off and you want to do it? Like, I don't know if anything is necessarily worse than the other. I just think that like different types of motivations for problems demand different solutions for those problems.
I would agree with that. You know, I think that there's a huge polarization in the conversation that's happening right now because it's a white cop killing a black man, and everybody wants to jump on the racism train whenever a white person kills a black person. That's unfortunately the first way that the narrative always goes. And the reality is that we don't just have a racism issue in America. We have a police brutality issue. You know, several people brought up that just a few years ago, a white guy was murdered by cops in almost the exact same way. They pinned him down to the ground and he suffocated to death. And you don't hear enough about that. And I think that there is a conversation that needs to be started about the fact that, you know, it's a police brutality issue, and we can stem a conversation off of that that says that police brutality, you know, affects the black community more than it affects the white community, but it's still a police brutality issue. And we can address both of these issues at the same time and acknowledge both of these issues at the same time. Not one of those issues is necessarily worse than the other, but they are issues that need to be addressed.
Gotcha. And another question. Someone had mentioned to me recently, because there are curfew. I don't know if you guys have curfews. We have a curfew in Denver.
I think the curfew might be national now. I think every major state and city, like I think it didn't. What I was just listening to Trump's speech before we came on, but I thought Trump, didn't he say he was setting like a federal curfew or something, or did I completely invent that?
Whoa.
I don't know, but my curfew's at 6 p.m. here in Philly.
Mine is like at 5 p.m. My curfew keeps going retroactively. I notice it, like I'll get a text at like 2 o'clock. It's like curfew is 8 o'clock. And then at 4 o'clock, I'll get one. It's like curfew's at 6 o'clock. And then when 6 o'clock rolls around, it's like the curfew was at 5. It's like, what the fuck? It feels like a parent that's
Well,
trying
at
to get
least
me
you
in trouble.
got texts. Like we've been on curfew for 2 days. I got my first text tonight to say that we were on curfew. Like they didn't tell anybody.
Oh, yeah. LA has been like for the past 2 or 3 days, I think. Yeah.
Whoa, I can't believe how early you guys have curfews there.
Mine, I think yesterday, I want to say for Beverly Hills, it was like 4 or 5. I think it was 4 p.m. It was unimaginable. I was like, wow. Yeah.
It's insane.
Smokes.
It's insane. Like I was trying to get out. Like it's a horrible feeling. Like I'm rushing around at 5:30 trying to get out of my own home. I have to, you know, pack my car one item at a time so that I can like look around my surroundings while I'm loading my car. I have to put my kids in my car one at a time, like double, triple check that all my doors are locked before I leave my house. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. One question I do have is, someone had put it to me recently, and this is maybe like a statement. We can see just if you guys agree with this or if you disagree, and to the extent of which direction. They had said that curfews are pointless because they said the only people who would follow a curfew are the people who wouldn't riot. And they said the people who will riot are already like the per se rioting is breaking the law. And so they were saying that they're going rioting. Like, why would they say, well, we're going to riot tonight, but there's a curfew? I guess we'll call it off. So would you guys agree with this? Or do you think that's probably stated too haphazardly? It's maybe painting with broad brushstrokes.
I mean, this is a really hard one. I think that, like, if I'm going to be really generous, I think spiritually, I agree with the idea. Because the point is that, like, the reason why they set the curfew, what that guy said, that he felt like he discovered something, like, oh, well, it's only to catch people that are going to do it anyway. Well, that's, like, the whole point. They want it to be so that they can arrest you if you're outside past a certain time without needing, like, probable cause. Now they can just arrest you. Now, like, if we were honest to God, like on the brink of like civil war and shit was collapsing and we needed to get shit under control, and it's like I can empathize, like, okay, fuck it, like we're setting a curfew, if you're out we're gonna arrest you. I think that I don't know if that's gonna be effective in this situation, because shit is like so fucked right now. I don't know if that's gonna actually work, but yeah, I don't know.
I personally think that the curfews are actually making matters worse. I mean, tensions are already high whenever it comes to trying to force people into their homes because we've been locked down for 3 months. People are really, really tired of politicians and police officers telling them when they cannot come out of their homes. And like you saw, I don't know if you guys saw the video, a friend of mine posted on Twitter of people just standing on their porch recording the police moving down their street, and the police screamed at them to get inside their house, and then they gave them a few seconds warning, and then they started firing at them. Like, you know, what you're going to create from that is like, yeah, a lot of people are going to run scared into their homes, but you're going to get a significant number of people that are like, you have absolutely no authority to tell me that I have to be in my home. You're going to shoot me on my front porch. Then I'm going to support this because you're doing that to me. Like, oh, I totally get it now. You know, people that originally weren't against police officers, you're going to see that take a turn. Or people that were kind of on the fence of, yeah, what he did was wrong. Like, I understand the protests, but the riots are a little out of control. You know, police are just trying to do their jobs. Well, you shoot at innocent people, you're going to turn those people against you. So in my opinion, the curfews are doing a lot more harm than they are good.
Yeah, ideologically, I don't think I'm opposed to the idea of a curfew in this circumstance, but the problem is it just like paired with everything else, it's not good. Like, you already have like so many videos of police that are just mishandling the fuck out of all of this, and like this should, like, as a quick aside, this should be pretty worrying. Like, right now, the police should be acting the best they've ever acted because they know that they have literally international spotlights on them right now, and every motherfucker on the street has a cell phone. So this should be like the police at their finest moment because you know everything is recorded. And this is the type of behavior we're getting, like dozens of videos of police doing like really fucky shit everywhere. And the rhetoric coming from the top isn't helping. You know, when they start looting, we start shooting. Like, Jesus Christ, Trump, what the fuck is wrong with you? So when you pair like the pretty bad actions of a lot of, I won't even say the majority of police officers because there have been a lot of peaceful protests, there have been a lot of cool cops around, I'm sure, but like there have been enough bad apples that like it's making everything look really fucked. When you pair that with the bad rhetoric from the top, with the fact that people are justifiably outraged, with the fact that people have been locked in their fucking homes for 2 months because of quarantine and shit, like they're just like all of that together makes for like a pretty bad combination of factors such that like I mean, like, stay-at-home orders or curfews and shit are just not, it doesn't seem very effective at this point.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. We do have other related questions, given that you seem to were separated at birth. You're twins.
Yeah, we're agreeing way too much.
I had a feeling it might happen, though. I think that it's there's a lot that I thought is like you probably guys would both agree on.
Yeah, it was not, well, because when in the email when you responded with it, you thought the media had it overblown. I didn't know if you meant that like the media maybe is hyping things up a little bit, or that the media is lying because COVID-19 was a disease created in a Chinese bioweapons lab that was intentionally fit. Like, I didn't know like which direction we were gonna go from there. So like, yeah. I mean, of course, like the media overplays shit. Like, I can't deny that at all. Of course. Yeah.
Gotcha. And this is an open question, so this might be one that is kind of like more a lot of avenues to explore. Andrew Bia, thanks for your question, gave a suggestion of a topic. They asked, can someone tell me what institution created the racism in this current situation that's going on?
I don't think that it was any specific institution that created it. I mean, you're looking at a very, very long, drawn out, deep-rooted issue in American history. I mean, the right likes to play it off like, you know, slavery was all these years ago and you just need to get over it. But the reality is that, you know, minorities, particularly the Black community, has faced all kinds of obstacles that the white community in America hasn't. And it stems back even before slavery, just the idea that, you know, Black people were less than white people, and Black people had to fight their way all the way up to the 1960s, to the civil rights era, and still on. And I think that, you know, there are situations in America even today. I don't think that America has a very deep-rooted race. I think that racism overall is, a smaller issue to specific people in smaller areas of the country. But, you see cases like Ahmaud Arbery, you see cases like this where it sparks the racism question. And the divide is still there. It's still a very polarizing question, and it really shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a topic that's so polarizing and so divisive. We should be able to meet on solid ground and be like, yeah, this happened, and it's possibly a racism issue, and that needs to be addressed and explored. And if it wasn't racism, then great, it wasn't racism, and that's one less person out there that's racist. But I don't think that racism as a whole should be something that we're so scared to address because we don't want to admit that it does exist now or has ever existed in the past.
As an addition to that, one thing that also like really bothers me is that like I feel like people don't have very many principled stances for any of the issues that they actually support. So, for instance, I own firearms. I like firearms. I think that there should probably be more restrictions related to like background checks or like private sales. You should probably have to file, I don't remember the form for like the federal background check, but like I'm okay with stuff like that. One thing that really bothers me though is when people come out like very, very strong with firearms, but where was the NRA when was it Philip Castile? Was that the guy's name?
Philadro Castile?
Yeah. The law-abiding, gun-owning citizen in his car said he had a firearm, and then it looked like the cop just shot him because he said he smelled weed. Like, this seems like the type of case where, like, I would expect the NRA to be in here and to be fucking livid because, like, this is a man that was, accurately stated he had a firearm, and then he got executed by the state. By like these are issues where we're like, well, what the fuck? Like, where's the NRA on this? Or, like, conservatives in general talk about how, like, we need the Second Amendment to protect us from an oppressive government and blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, yeah, we need to go out and murder all the fucking rioters with the state police. I'm so glad that the Coast Guard is mobilized or that the National Guard is mobilized to come out and, like, kill all these protesters. Like, damn, I thought we were, like, in favor of protesting, like state power. It kind of reminds me of like it was so hard to do anything about like gun legislation in the U.S. until like the Black Panthers showed up and started to carry guns around, and it's like, okay, well, hold on, now all of a sudden we don't feel comfortable with people protecting their Second Amendment rights. And I think that like more broadly speaking, I think this is where issues of race kind of come in too, where people feel like it feels like there are like people are a little bit more motivated sometimes by race than they would like to admit, and that definitely bothers me, and I think it bothers a lot of other people too. When there's more outrage, about a black football player kneeling on a field than there is about a white cop kneeling on a black guy's back for 9 minutes until he asphyxiates and dies, in full view of everybody in the public. I definitely think it's hard to just say, well, there are no race issues in America, or we don't have big problems that we still need to work on.
I agree. I totally agree, and I think that like I have kind of like I give them less wiggle room because I come from a very like right-wing conservative traditional, NRA supporting, like traditional conservative background. And so I've been in that mindset, and, since moving out of that mindset, I see the flaws in it, and so I think that I'm less likely to give people the benefit of the doubt for not moving out of that line of thinking than I would be had I not ever been in that background. And it's very, very true. The NRA really, really lost my support whenever that happened because here is a man, he is lawfully carrying a gun, and he lost his life because a cop smelled marijuana on him. And the reality is that the majority of conservatives are anti-legalizing any kind of drugs, even marijuana. And that's a significant problem. It's another thing that they don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the number of people, particularly black people, that have had their lives ruined over nonviolent drug offenses. That's not something that they want. That's not an issue that they want to address. More and more conservatives are slowly, coming to that line and wanting to have a conversation about it. But the official conservative stance on marijuana is that it's illegal, it's wrong, it should stay illegal, regardless of the problems that it poses, particularly to minority communities, because it's an illegal drug still.
Gotcha. I think that given that a number of people in the audience have asked for this, and my goal, because I feel like it would, for some reason, even though in other debates I'd be like, we would just tell you ahead of time, but for some reason I'm like, I don't want to bring this up for the purpose of just like seeing you go at each other, but maybe you could think of it in terms of like any new perspectives you might be able to bring regarding the pro-life, pro-choice issue. So
I knew it was coming.
Really reaching,
I knew it was coming.
So there might be like new ways of thinking about it, which I think the audience, because so far the audience seems to have really enjoyed this, or like they agree on everything, but it's a really fun thing to listen to. And so there might be things that you're kind of like, hey, this is a typical argument I hear, and I have a response that I think most people haven't heard before or thought of before. That's kind of the thing I think that people would really enjoy hearing, kind of these new perspectives, or maybe intuition pumps, like, kind of cases of like intuition pump just being like in philosophy, where somebody gives you this example where they say, for example, like, let's say a baby is set at your doorstep, and are you going to take care of it or not? Something like that, where they would, it kind of moves your intuitions in one way or another. So are there any perspectives that you think are kind of like, hey, here's a fresh new idea I don't think a lot of people have heard that I just recently heard?
Who, do you want to go first this one?
Go ahead and take it, because I actually am not familiar. I didn't get that far into your videos today to know where exactly you stand on the pro-life, pro-choice situation.
Sure. So this is a really hard one. I don't like discussing pro-life, pro-choice stuff, because I feel like what happens is these conversations ground out into areas that are, this is going to sound really lofty, I'm sorry, but into areas that are like unknowable by humans. So I don't believe like in any type of objective moral code written into the universe. I don't believe in any like objective like right or wrongs that are knowable by humans. I don't think these types of things exist. And you kind of need these things to power statements like killing an unborn child is wrong. So the area that I'm at right now, and I've gone back and forth on this to where I was like 55% pro-life, where now I think I'm 45% like pro-choice. Like I kind of like lean like very carefully on each side. I don't really know. But like the area that I'm at right now is I feel like there's no point in protecting an unconscious mind, is what it feels like. That if a person doesn't have a conscious experience that is relatable to mine, that this is not a person whose life I'm necessarily concerned with protecting. So examples of this would be non-existent persons, so people that don't exist yet, or like comatose persons. So let's say that you're a fully functioning human being, everything works perfectly fine in your body, but you're in a coma and you don't have like a conscious experience right now. It seems like that's a type of person who I wouldn't really be concerned with the outcome of like this person if they just like don't have any conscious experience whatsoever. And it feels like making an argument in favor of that is really, really, really difficult without trying to appeal to some like objective moral code. That's basically where I'm at with that right now.
No, I totally see where you're coming from. I think that too often we try to have these abstract conversations about where different people's morality is. My thinking, I mean, it's evolved over the years. I've been involved in pro-life activism for a better half of 7 years now. My thinking on the pro-life versus pro-choice issue has really evolved to the point where I've kind of abandoned the moral argument of whether or not abortion is okay, and kind of gone into a more consistency argument. Whereas the majority of people that support abortion would at some point say that killing human beings is wrong. You have to make that cutoff somewhere, and most pro-choice people make that cutoff at like the 3-month mark. Once a fetus is 12 weeks old, then it's wrong. They shouldn't be allowed to kill them. A lot of pro-choicers have the cutoff of birth. Once the baby's born, they're detached from their mother, they're no longer using the mother's body, then it's wrong to kill them. A lot of pro-choicers support killing babies after birth.
Peter Singer, I think. Yeah.
It's one of those things that, it's unfortunate, but there are people out there that support it. My argument is that as long as your way of thinking is consistent all the way through, and that you don't have any flaws in the consistency of what you believe, then at least you're being consistent across the board, and you can have that for yourself. But I think that the majority of people that support abortion cannot maintain that consistency across the board. We have, for better or worse, kind of a moral absolute that guides civilization. Without that moral absolute, we can't live in civilized society. It's wrong to kill humans. We've established that. You go up and you murder another person, you're going to prison. In some states, if you murder another person, then you're going to be, you're going to get capital punishment. You're going to die. But if there's a cutoff somewhere, then you're opening up the gateways for other things. You know, if it's wrong to kill a person at this point in time, then it's wrong to kill a person at this point in time. You can't say that it's wrong here, but it's not wrong here. You know, all human life is valuable, or no human life is valuable. We can't place the value of a human being based on what they do for us or how they make us feel, or what they contribute to society, because there's plenty of people that contribute absolutely nothing to society that are absolutely a complete and total drain on society. We're not going to make the moral argument that it's okay to kill them. So I base my argument on whether or not you're consistent. If it's okay to kill someone's here, then it has to be okay to kill them here, 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 and here.
Yeah, actually, it's just so fucking lame, but I agree. I mean, and that's like my big issue is that like honest to God, I think that there are good arguments on the side of pro-life and there are good arguments on the side of pro-abortion, but they're so seldomly made. Like usually most of the arguments are shit. So like for instance, like a pro-choice, like I don't think there are good pro-choice arguments that exist where you say that like the fetus is like a human being, but it's just infringing on the autonomy of the mother. Like infringing on somebody's autonomy generally isn't an okay reason to murder somebody, especially if they're doing it and they're not aware of it, right? Like if we say that a fetus is a normal human and it's entitled to all the rights of protection, but because it's infringing on their autonomy, we have a right to kill them. Well, like if a child wanders onto your property and starts eating your food, you don't have rights to kill the child, right? Like it's not consciously making that choice. It's not like a moral agent that needs to be punished. So like at the very least, be consistent in your arguments, right? Like you can't say that like a fetus is like a living, breathing, well not living, breathing, but like a living human, but because it's taking away the rights of the mother, like, you know, fucking blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just, as long as the arguments are consistent, I'm generally pretty chill with whatever people go with.
Yeah, if I come across a pro-choice person that is completely consistent, like I did see one of my mutuals on Twitter arguing with a pro-choicer a couple weeks ago, and they made the argument. They think that it should be legal to kill humans at any stage of life. And like, okay, I mean, I think you're a psychopath, but at least you're consistent. You know, I'm just, you know, have a good day.
Yeah, fucking A. And yeah, and that's one of my, you mentioned it, I don't know if you were joking or not, but I think Peter Singer is like the big utilitarian guy who's like, yeah, man, abortion should be fine. It's like, well, why? You know, oh, because they're leeching off of the family. They have the child can't do anything on its own. Oh, really? Well, would you be in favor then of killing 1-year-olds? Yeah, fuck it. It's like, oh, okay, well, fuck it. I mean, if
well, at least you're consistent.
Yeah, sure,
like, go for it.
Yeah, okay, all right.
We don't have to go too deep into this. I do enjoy, especially because you guys weren't like prepped, you know, for this. I didn't let you guys know that we talk about this plethora of different topics. We could. One person asked an interesting question you might differ on. I think I'd be really surprised if you didn't differ on this one, but it's okay if you do, if you agree. Is whether if we didn't have Trump, who would be better? Who ought to be? Who's the next best we could have if Trump isn't pleasing to either of you?
Like for coming up for the next election, or for like leaders like right now, or like for the past election, would Hillary have done better, or like what?
That's a great question. How? Let's say we say futuristic, looking forward.
I mean, in terms of like the next election cycle, like I think pretty obviously I would vote for almost any other candidate, almost any candidate the Dems put up over Trump, or even if the Republicans put up another candidate. Like I would vote for almost anybody opposite to Trump right now. But whether you call it Orange Man bad or not, like Trump has just done so much damage to this country across an impressive number of areas. Like I think he's hurt the way that countries around the world have viewed us. I think he's hurt the stability of the world. You know, his threats to pull out of NATO, his threats to leave the WHO, which I think he made good on. I don't remember if he signed an EO on that or.
He did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He did.
Like his inability to keep his own country like under control. Like I feel like Trump has just been horrible in so many different ways, so many more ways than I could have even ever imagined. You know, like even in the beginning when I was like, because I had the same, you know, like liberal reaction to like, oh my fucking God, I can't believe Trump won. This is unbelievable. But like, even at that time, if you would have asked me, like, I probably would have said, you know, yeah, Trump is really fucking bad. But like, I mean, I seriously doubt he can do that much. Like, Jesus Christ. Like, it's another shitty whatever president. But like, God damn, like he's definitely challenged the notion of how much damage a president can do in a particular time period. I mean, I will say for all intents and purposes, like our institutions are a fuck ton stronger than I thought they were, because it seems like we're still keeping things together somewhat despite everything. Yeah.
Got it. How about, would you guys have a preference? Is there someone who you would say, hey, this is the person I think could do the job best if we get Trump out?
I mean, I was really holding out for a decent libertarian candidate, and I haven't completely sold out on voting for the libertarian candidate this election cycle. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about her. I'm watching and waiting and hoping that she's someone that I can get behind and support. I was really, really hoping that Adam Kokesh was going to pull out the nomination and me finally be able to like go with some enthusiasm to the voting booth, but that didn't happen. I think that, you know, as far as getting someone into the White House, like ideally, just a unifying candidate at this point. That's probably my biggest issue behind, you know, the abortion debate, is that our country is so divided. And as much as the right likes to blame Trump for that, I mean, he's definitely done no favors in helping it, and he's definitely made it worse. It started with President Obama, and it's just really, really gone downhill. And I think that more than anything, what we need in this country is a candidate that's going to like bridge that gap between the right and the left, because until we bridge that gap, absolutely nothing is going to get done in this country. You can have a Republican president, you can have a Democratic president, you can have one party controlling all three branches of government, and nothing is going to get done in this country until we bridge that divide. And Republicans and Democrats and conservatives and liberals, or whatever you want to label yourself, until those people on either side of the divide start working together to wanting this country to be a better place for everybody, including the people that they disagree with, nothing's going to get done and nothing matters.
Oh, okay, hold on. I have a good one. I believe that voting third party is always bad and counterintuitive to your own interests. So here's something I'm curious how you deal with this. So I am of the opinion that any third party that you support, if you support that third party, there's probably a primary party that matches your interests a little bit more than the opposing party. So for instance, if you're somebody that supports the Green Party, in general, I would imagine that the Democrats more broadly support your positions than the Republicans. Or if you're a libertarian, depending on why you're a libertarian, I imagine that broadly speaking, the Republicans probably serve your issues a little bit more than the Democrats do. It feels like when you have a third party, especially because of the way the political system works in the U.S., that can't possibly win an election because there's just not enough people to vote for them, that anytime you vote for said third party, all you do is you end up as a spoiler for another party that would more support your interests than the one that ends up winning. Does that make sense? How do you deal with that kind of, I guess, issue? Or what do you think about that?
I get that a lot. You know, I get people in my mentions so much whenever I mention that I'm not voting for Trump because I'm a pro-life activist. They're like, you know, why wouldn't you vote for the pro-life party and so on and so forth. And I think, unfortunately, it really comes down to, you know, morals. I mean, it's as unfortunate as it is. You know, I think that morals are such a subjective idea. But like, my vote isn't owed to either party. I don't owe allegiance to either party based on my moral or political opinions. You have to earn my vote as a political candidate. And thus far, I mean, like I said, I haven't put my support behind the Libertarian candidate thus far. I don't know enough about her to say that I support her just because she is the Libertarian Party candidate and I am a Libertarian. But thus far, in the last few elections, both, you know, whether it be on state levels or on the federal level, in the last few elections, none of the parties have won over my vote based on, you know, their promises, their ideas, their policies. And I think whenever it comes down to it, the reason why we have such a problem in this country is because less people are sticking to their morals whenever they go to the voting booth. They're more interested in, like, we just have to stick it to the other side. We don't want the Dems to win. We don't want the Republicans to win. So we're going to vote for whoever the other party throws up in hopes that we can just keep control of the government and keep them from doing what they want to do and keep them from trying to stop us from doing what we want to do. And I think whenever people stopped abandoning their moral ideas on what they wanted to see in candidates is whenever we had such a huge problem, a huge cultural shift where it became the Republicans versus the Democrats, the conservatives versus the liberals. And you have people like me that are kind of like in the middle, where it's like, we have real issues that we want to see addressed. We have real problems. We have people that are really suffering, and you guys are so busy throwing rocks at each other that all these people in the middle suffering, they're not getting any kind of help. You don't care about them. You're just using them to pander to get their vote. And I really, really was hoping to see a Libertarian candidate that could kind of undermine where Trump was, because he's a more moderate. I mean, I don't think that Donald Trump is even really a Republican. He's definitely not a conservative. So the people that are kind of more in the middle, that's like, I don't really want to vote for Donald Trump, but I really, really, really can't vote for Joe Biden. And unfortunately, I think that the Libertarian Party effed it up once again, because that's like their playing card. But I do think that whenever it comes to voting third party, it's the same issue as voting for either of the other two main candidates. If you're not able to morally support a candidate, then just don't vote. And I have done that before. I did it in 2016. And if I can't support the Libertarian candidate, I'm going to do it again in 2020. I'm going to stay home and I'm not going to vote because I don't owe anybody my vote.
Okay.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. We have maybe time for a little bit more convo, and then going into the Q&A. It's actually gone really quick. Looking at some of the questions or suggestions that people have given in the live chat. We do have one that goes back to the original topic from Gregory. If you've seen Gregory, folks, I'm so sorry to put you on the spot, Gregory. Gregory is like a real life prodigy. He's 13, but he's impressive. So he asked, why for Destiny, why do you claim to care for the working class when you support a lockdown that has caused 40 million to file for unemployment in a matter of 10 weeks?
Well, because filing for unemployment is probably better than dying. I mean, like, there's like sizable chunks of the population that we could have lost had too many hospitals gotten too full with like SARS-CoV-2 related diseases, or from other things that can't be treated because the hospitals are too full. And I mean, there are other ways that you can temporarily alleviate economic strain. There aren't very many ways that you can alleviate somebody being dead. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that just because you support, I mean, like the guy's question kind of sounds like he believes we never needed a lockdown or anything at all because everything was fake or whatever. But I mean, like, we already had like 100,000 die. We're probably going to top out at around 130 or 140 maybe, depending on what the second wave looks like if that shows up. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that just because you were in favor of a lockdown means you don't care about poor people. It's a really stupid position to take.
A very pointed question, and don't worry, Kay, we've got one for you. I think that we this might be a fine time to go into the Q&A, as this is when we normally go in. Stupid horror energy. I'm only just because we had a pointed question toward Destiny. I will give a pointed question toward Kay. I think that this is, my guess is that Sarah went and like Googled you. So she asks, does Kay believe in driver's licenses?
Actually, no. Actually, I don't. I really don't. I think it's just, I mean, I think that there's an extent to where, we want to make sure that, before you go onto the road, that you are going to be safe and that you know how your vehicle operates. But, I live in Philly. Any number of people driving down the 95 should not have their licenses. I mean, people drive like insane people. So I think that, especially now with the whole, real ID thing where, they're tracking whether you've been fully vaccinated and all kinds of stuff, I really just think it's a ploy for the government to be able to control you and track what you're doing. No, I kind of don't support the institution of driver's license.
Can I ask questions? I'm curious about that. Obviously, as somebody that does support driver's license, what do you think, how would we verify at all that somebody has to display some level of competency to operate a vehicle then before they start driving? Or do we just hope that people figure it out? Or
I think that, I mean, we have all kinds of schooling and educational purposes. I mean, driver's ed is something that a lot of public schools offer. I think that there's an adequate way to, I mean, like I said, there are plenty of people on the road that obviously do not know how to control a motor vehicle perfectly. And then you have people over a certain age that have, eyesight problems that aren't being checked and so on and so forth. I think that whenever it comes down to driver's license, I think the main argument for it is for identification purposes. And I think that there are plenty of ways for people to get identification to carry on them without carrying a driver's license. I think that it really comes down to a level of responsibility. I think the state takes way too much on and taking away people's level of personal responsibility. If you operate a vehicle while you're under the influence of alcohol and somebody gets hurt, well, then you're going to get in trouble. Well, if you operate a vehicle and you don't know how to operate that vehicle properly and somebody gets hurt, well, you have to pay the price for that. And I don't think that that's going to be any better or worse whether or not they passed a 5-minute driving test where a random person signed off that they know how to operate that vehicle properly.
Couldn't you? So one of the problems with like paying the price is that sometimes the cost associated with the action is something that could never be like repaid, right? So for instance, if you get into an accident and you kill somebody's family, well, whatever price you pay is never going to recompensate the family for the death of a loved one. In terms of like, I do agree that driver's licenses in the United States are a joke. I think most of the world agrees. But couldn't that same argument be used for like more stringent testing? So for instance, in most European countries, and I think in Canada, you mentioned driver's ed. That's something that's actually required in a lot of European countries to get a driver's license. Where in the United States, there are states where you can get a license without ever actually even taking a driving test, without ever actually having to drive a car. Yeah, why wouldn't you accept this argument in favor of just like more restrictions, I guess?
I guess my stance would depend on like looking at statistics, like are there significantly less accidents in Europe now that they require driver's ed before you obtain a license? Like I would have to look at the data on that before I made an opinion, like before I formed an opinion on that.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. And we do have, we'll start reading through the super chats. Thanks so much, Steven Steen, for your super chat. Said, congrats, Kay, on your dominating win. Don't worry, Steven. He's our friendly troll. But he is a fan of yours, Kay, nonetheless. Yeah, it's basically, you know, call me old-fashioned. I'm going to show my hand just a bit. But I think something creepy about curfews, you know, like, well, not my dad, but let me just pull this up. And I'm kind of being serious though, that I'm not a huge fan of the curfew, but I normally don't show my hand. But you know.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't think anybody generally, or at least I don't think any adults like being told you can't go outside. It feels very fucking weird, especially in a country like the United States, for sure. But I mean,
like, unfortunately though, like with the whole coronavirus thing, like it really does show like how many people really just want the government to tell them like what to do and what is and is not okay, so that they don't really have to think for themselves. It's kind of like really sad and pathetic.
I think the big problem is there's a name for this. It might be the free rider problem, but I think there's another more specific name. I think the problem is that, or maybe this is even just like a standard like game theory problem. The problem is that if you don't have some central body that's kind of like forcing you to adhere to a certain standard, there becomes like no incentive to do so. So as an example of this, Personally, I believe that climate change is a really big problem. Personally, I think that it's caused by humans and we need to do something about it. Now, regardless of how you feel about climate change, you must agree that in order for us to do anything about it, it would seem like the government would probably have to step in, because even if like 1/3 of the population stepped in and tried to do something on their own, the other 2/3 would be way better off. They'd be way more economically situated. They'd have like more freedom in their lives. They'd be way happier. And then the problem would still actually exist, right? Like even if 1/3 of people chilled on polluting or doing greenhouse gases, all they'd be doing is hurting their own lives, and they wouldn't even be fixing the problem because everybody else could still be doing just as much. And then you just like lose out. It's like a game theory thing. That's like, I think that's the reason why it feels like you need a central body sometimes to step in and do things.
I'll play your game, Steven.
What?
Maybe there's good that comes out of it.
Oh, sure. Or like vaccines would be a good example too. I don't know, Kay, I don't know what your position is on vaccines, but like that's a thing where like if half the population takes it, it doesn't really help. I mean, it helps a few people, but like it's one of those things where you really need like the majority of the population bought into it to have the desired effects.
Thoughts, Kay?
Well, as a libertarian, my first and like my initial reaction to anything involving the government is, absolutely no. My opinion on kind of like these more cultural driven things, I do believe that there is a significant force behind like social pressure, I guess you could call it. I think that we are very much driven by what is considered, for lack of a better word, cool or in. So I think that if you make it more of a social priority to do things, that society is going to follow in suit. I mean, as powerful as the anti-vax movement has become, there's still a relatively small part of the population the majority of the American population still fully supports vaccines and thinks that you're stupid if you don't vaccinate yourself or your family. I think that since climate change is a fairly new idea, and because it became so polarized so quickly politically, that it might take a little bit longer for it to catch on. But I think that if it hadn't been so polarized so quickly in the political realm, I think that you would see more of a cultural push, a societal push for people to embrace, low waste, recycling, things like that, things that, people just, it's kind of fallen by the wayside because people don't really talk about it. People don't really think about it. It's not something that's considered like a socially in idea. I think that I think that there's a lot, I mean, it comes from the same idea of why protests work. I mean, if enough people are voicing their opinions loud enough, eventually, society is going to take that idea and support it and push it as, the universally decided position to take. And unfortunately, with climate change, it didn't take so much so because conservatives were against it and Democrats were for it and became a politically charged subject. But I fully believe that it would have taken a lot better in society had it not become so politically polarized.
I mean, I feel like when it comes to policy positions related to climate change, like that's always going to be like a political thing, right? Like there's no way not to, because any policy addressing climate change is necessarily going to involve more government restriction or government interference in what would otherwise be normal market forces. So it feels like that's an issue that is always going to lend itself to polarization. And then I think for vaccines, the problem I have, again, like I feel like vaccines are a good issue that illustrate the problem with not having like a federal mandate, because for vaccines, you kind of need almost everybody to be bought into it for the people that can't be. Because we've seen the resurgence of some things like measles, for instance, exists in the U.S. now, and I think that was a completely eradicated disease just because there are groups of people that are anti-vax, and it seems like we're going backwards on the vaccine issue now, where it just takes like a small number of people to harm the overall population because of their beliefs. It seems.
2 seconds.
Yeah. Sure.
Forgive me for cutting in just because we're ready to jump in. So I'm going to go live in 3, 2, 1. Ready, set, go. Thanks for your patience, guys.
Yeah. Go.
And we're back.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We are excited. This is going to be great as we wrap up the Q&A and then let our speakers go for the night to rest. So we appreciate their patience. We appreciate your patience, folks. It was embarrassing enough. The stream started out lagging. And then that's it. I'm done with Streamlabs. It's basically, we used OBS and we were like, hey, let's try Streamlabs. Like long ago, and then Streamlabs failed us, so we went to OBS. But then like 3 months ago I was like, you know what, let's try Streamlabs again. But no, never again. So thanks for your patience. Let's jump into those questions, folks. Very excited. And then I actually do have a fun question because I hated you guys. We just it had to be while we were off air. We just had Destiny and Kay disagreeing on something, and it's something that I'm like, ooh, here's a juicy question. It's one that I think is probably going to come up in the future, and I can't help but ask just to get a quick response from you both, as we've had kind of like a shortened discussion and a Q&A, but this is a question that in particular with COVID, possibly, will there be laws in the future on whether or not a COVID vaccine should be mandatory? And would that be a good thing or a bad thing when you're weighing all the factors and you're trying to kind of balance them all out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as we were kind of just talking about, like I'm generally pro-vaccine. As for whether or not it's mandatory, I mean that super depends on the effectiveness and the severity of SARS-CoV-2 or similar diseases being in the United States, or similar viruses being in the United States. Like if it comes that like every single year we're having another 100 to 150,000 people dying, seems like a thing that probably like fuck it. Like if you want to work, you should have this vaccine. Otherwise, you're ruining things for everybody. So yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on the severity of the illness.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think that as a libertarian and particularly as a mom, I think I see the idea of mandatory vaccinations as something it's very scary and can lead to some very questionable issues. I don't want the government having the power to tell me what I have to inject into my children or into myself. But I think that whenever it comes down to, I think it has to be deliberated based on the individual illness. I mean, the smallpox vaccine was mandatory because people were dying by the hundreds of thousands, just wiping people out. And I think that whenever it comes to COVID-19, I think you're going to see a significant more pushback if they try to mandate the vaccine, mainly because of how it was handled by the government, and the issue of, you know, the numbers being way bigger than they were. You know, the numbers that they were giving us turned out to be completely overblown, and we didn't see the death rates at where they were. And I think that they're going to see significant more pushback because people aren't super trusting of what the government is saying we do and do not need. Personally, I don't think that COVID-19 is serious enough to where we need to be releasing our fundamental human rights to the government to mandate that everybody get a vaccine. That's just where I stand on that.
Gotcha. And other questions we have, definitely want to ask these, is there's some juicy ones in here. Let's see. Appreciate. Thanks so much. Luis Ramiro asked, the numbers were in fact underrated. So I think they're talking about COVID cases or deaths. They said the 1.5 must be cases. Well, 1.5 to 2 million people was if we decided to do nothing and let horde immunity dictate the course. Our leaders have shifted the numbers from 50,000 to 75,000, and now they're saying 135,000.
Yeah,
I think it's impossible to say whether, you know, what would have happened had we not locked down. You know, it's that could be a game that we could, you know, we could talk circles around that. You know, what might have happened had we not locked down. We just have to, you know, go with what we have. We did lock down, and this is what happened, and, you know, we have to live with that.
Gotcha. And did you want to say something, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, like, one of the important things to remember for those projections is that, like, these are projections with a lot of variance. Like, there was like, it could have been as low as 50,000, it could have been as high as like 2.5 million. Like, it's really hard to tell based on what's going on, like where things are going to be, right? Like the data, as you project out in time like this, you get like really, really big variance in where things could go. So
gotcha. And thanks so much for your super chat. Stephen Steen said consciousness doesn't come till after birth.
Wrong.
I think this is,
but go ahead.
Gotcha. Stephen Steen, Destiny disagrees with you. And
well, no, I don't disagree. You're just wrong. Things are conscious before, like, passing through a vagina doesn't magically endow you with consciousness. Like, you have a conscious experience before you're born. I don't remember if it's at around like 12 weeks or whatever. There's some time, some number of months in where it happens, but then you gain like self-awareness and all of that by the time you're like 2. Your brain is fully developed by the time you're 25. But to say that like it's like when the vagina is pushing you out, it gives you consciousness on your way out the door is like, it's not how that works at all.
Andrew Handelsman, thanks for your super chat, who said, amazing. And then Lily RO, thanks for your super chat, said the two parties hold too much power over our elections, government, media, and discourse as well. They polarize each other to keep us at each other's throats.
And unfortunately, that's not likely to change because, you know, too many people, they recognize the problem but are unwilling to step out to do anything about it. You know, we see that, you know, the mainstream media is constantly trying to pit us against each other, but we still consume it. You know, we see that the two-party system has too much power, but we still continue to vote for the lesser of two evils because we're not willing to step out and say that we deserve better and we're going to demand better. So more people step up and say, you know, we're done with this. We're not going to consume mainstream media and let them go and, you know, just fade off, you know, until they say that we're not going to vote for these two candidates because we don't like either one of them. You know, we're going to stay home or we're going to vote third party or do something. It's just going to be a never ending cycle.
Gotcha. And I think we have one or two more. Let's see. We got that. We had a new one come in. Thanks for your super chat. Hikikaumuri, they said, can you ask Destiny if he believes in deadbeat dadism?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course.
Gotcha.
These are all like
I don't know what that is.
It's from a meme song that somebody made about Jesse Lizard or something. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And thanks for your, let's see, I think we maybe had one other one come in. So we do have other questions, though, standard questions as well. Thanks for yours. From Brian, let's see. As the 7-day moving average shows that our decrease in cases has stopped. We've stabilized at 20,000 a day, and it's possible the curve is going back up. So kind of going back to that number of cases, this is similar to one of the questions we just asked, but if you want to add anything, you can, if it's different enough.
I mean, the biggest thing that I'm worried about right now is we fucked this up so bad. Like, this is just so bad. It's so bad, like, from a health point of view. It's also really bad economically. Like, I was surprised that we stayed locked down as much as we did because I didn't think we would be able to bear this much economic harm. Like, the biggest worry is that if we reopen and then there's like a big second wave, I don't know what happens at that point. Like, we're going to have to shut everything down again. People are going to be ultra antsy to do it a second time. There's going to be another huge fight in Congress about much needed stimulus. We're already not going to know how much damage is caused by the first shutdown. There's a lot of businesses that are closing today that are never coming back again. Like, if we reopen and we do it in a haphazard manner and everything just goes to shit immediately, if the cases start to spike up dramatically again, and man, I don't know, it's going to be really, really, really bad. We have to be very careful how we handle it.
Gotcha. And Kay, did you want to say anything? If you want, you can. You don't have to.
No, I fully agree. I think that, I think that the best course of action right now is, the states that are reopening are doing so, they are taking the necessary precautions to do so. But then you have several states like mine. I'm one of, the 4 states that everybody talks about, that we have the 4 worst governors in the entirety of the United States of America. This is not about the virus anymore. It's about maintaining control. I mean, I think that there's so many, factors here about whether or not to open or reopen. And the fact of the matter is that whenever it comes down to it, like, we probably are going to see at least somewhat of a second wave whenever we open up. People have been shut into their homes for 3 months. Their immune systems are declining. They're not coming in contact with germs, and they haven't come in contact with this virus. So there's no way to tell whether or not their immune system is going to be able to fight it. And with a weakened immune system from being locked down and locked away from people and not being outside and not getting the same amount of interactions that we do every day, yeah, there's a significant chance that we're going to see a second wave here. And then you have to play in the factor of, there are going to be a significant amount of people that if we say that we're going to shut down again, they're going to say, absolutely not, we're not doing that again. And then you're going to see a level of resistance there. And it's really hard to tell how that'll play out as far as government intervention goes. Do you force people to shut down again whenever they're openly resisting that? After all of these riots and cities burning, I don't see that going very well with tensions being as high as they are. I think that there's a lot of factors that play into this. I think our best course of action is, states opening up, taking the precautions that need to be taken, let individual businesses do what they're going to do, and let people decide whether or not they're going to go into those businesses or not. If there's a business that's not, forcing you to wear a mask to go in, or maintaining social distancing, and you decide that you don't want to go into that business, then don't. Again, I think that the government tries way too hard to parent American citizens. Functioning adults can make their own health decisions about whether or not they're gonna stay locked down, or if they're going to open their businesses back up, or if they're going to patron businesses that aren't practicing social distancing and forcing you to wear masks. Let adults do what adults are going to do. Unfortunately, some people have to pay the price for, not being smart with the decisions that they make, but it's their mistake to make.
Gotcha.
Man, I think just as I don't trust people with their health. I don't think they can manage it at all. One of the biggest pushbacks that I would give against this, unfortunately, and it's something that has loomed for a while, like climate change. We don't really talk about it, but obesity is actually like destroying so many parts of our society. It hurts our ability to work efficiently because of people taking sick days, because of lifespans being decreased. It's a burden on our medical system. It causes disproportionate spending on bad goods and services. The way that we treat our health in the Western world, also, it's not an American problem, it's a Western world problem. I think that obesity is like a key example that like people have very bad risk-reward factories in their brain that aren't churning out like optimal decisions. And I think it's like a big crash course. I mean, arguably we've already crashed in the United States in regards to, how we approach our health. Like if you were to ask somebody today, would you rather have AIDS or would you rather be fat and have diabetes? I think every single person be like, I'd much rather be fat and have diabetes. Diabetes knocks 10 years off your lifespan, and HIV doesn't impact it at all anymore. Like, people have no idea how bad it is to be diabetic. And like, man, it's like 80% of people in the United States now are overweight, 70% in the UK and Germany and France and Italy. Like, all these other countries having these huge problems. It just doesn't seem like people could manage certain things, given the perverse incentives we have to sell things to you that are bad for you, right? Like, candy bars taste good. Government doesn't tell us not to. Well, we're going to sell a fuck ton of candy bars. People are going to eat themselves into an early grave, and then we all have to pay the cost for it, which is the worst part. Well, arguably people dying and that are probably the worst part, but depending on the look you take on it.
Yeah, but I would argue like that stems from this whole idea that, people just want other people to make the decisions for them and tell them what is and is not good. They rely too heavily on the government to say, candy bars are bad for you and they're going to make you fat and you're going to be overweight and you're going to suffer long-term effects from being overweight, instead of pushing out an adult population that is taking responsibility for their own actions. And unfortunately, as much as we like to say we live in a free society, but too often we pick up the slack for people that aren't making good decisions. It's like, yeah, you really effed up here, but it's okay. We're going to take care of it for you. If you drink yourself to near death where, your liver is completely shut down and you need a new one, you shouldn't be allowed to get on the transplant list when there are perfectly healthy people that are living perfectly healthy lives that, unfortunately their livers aren't working properly and they need a new one. I think that too often we are, as a society, we step in and coddle full-grown adults for the decisions that they made that put them in the position that they're in. And it's become a way of life in the first world countries.
This is something that I used to want to agree with this, but I feel like if you're a little bit critical about this for a while, I feel like it becomes pretty untenable very quickly. So the idea that we hold people responsible for their health is a really difficult thing to go on. We can use obesity as an example. The only number I've seen on this is, I think if you are at an obese BMI, you have less than 1% chance to ever return to a normal weight in your entire life, to get back into a normal BMI range. It's that hard once you've gotten obese to get back. There are people that reach obese levels of BMI before they're even 14 years old, right? Realistically, we're not going to blame a 9-year-old we're not going to blame a 6-year-old for being overweight, or a 9-year-old for being overweight, or a 12-year-old for being obese. If they've been fed that way their whole lives. So it seems kind of shitty that well, now you're, 35 and you already are, pre-diabetic, you have high hypertension. Is it your fault? I mean, kind of, but damn, you've been set up to fail right from the very beginning because of your parents, and now you have to live with those consequences, and you have such an impossible battle to fight back to get to what is normal, that I don't know, it seems like some third-party intervention is pretty important there.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but there has to be a limit. Unfortunately, we are living in a huge opioid epidemic in the United States, and some start on drugs whenever they're kids. Their parents, their older friends, loved ones get them hooked on drugs whenever they're kids, and then they grow up into society, they become adults, and they're still addicted to drugs. I mean, there comes a point where you do have to take a certain level of responsibility for your continued actions of your problem that puts you in the situation that you're in. It's I think that argument is too often used to excuse bad behavior as well. I mean, people that grow up impoverished, I grew up in poverty, my parents were dirt poor, and so I just didn't break the cycle. It's just I was handed a bad lot, so I should be able to live on welfare for the rest of my life because I was born into a poor home. I think that too often those arguments can be turned on each other back and forth. Where is the line? And I think that is a hard line to draw sometimes, but I think because it's a hard line to draw, as a society, we've chosen to just not draw it at all. And instead now we're, praising obesity as being beautiful instead of telling people, you're obese, you're hurting yourself, you're going to die. You need to start taking better care of yourself. We've gone so far to the extreme on the other side. We have morbidly obese women posing on the cover of Sports Illustrated. I mean, we've definitely taken this way too far and coddling full-grown adults for having very, very serious health problems.
I mean, people always point this out, but I don't know. I don't buy it. Like, people always say, like, oh, well, the health at every size movement, these SJWs or these liberals are coddling people too much. I mean, that's not true, though. The fattest people aren't found in the liberal cities. The fattest people are found in, in like the Midwest, in the country. Like, these are, and like as somebody that comes from Nebraska and now lives in LA and has traveled, all over the world, all over the US, is absolutely true. Like, you don't find all of these massively overweight people at Miami Beach or, like in downtown Chicago or, in all of these like more diverse, more like liberal SJW, San Francisco type places. These are people that you find like deep in Louisiana and in Alabama or in Ohio or Nebraska or Kansas. Like, I really do think that like obesity just seems to be like an impossible to avoid outcome when you have access to ultra sugary, ultra high calorie, super cheap food, and there's like no drawback to selling it. And in terms of like where do we draw the line, I don't know. I feel like sometimes it's kind of easy to be like, if we could theoretically, so the UK is experimenting with this, if we could theoretically like tax foods that have a certain number of sugar a little bit more, change people's buying habits a little bit. They don't want to pay, the extra $2 for, some candy bar when there might be another alternative that is a little bit cheaper, but it has less sugar. And if you can modify people's habits like that, I mean, if they want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and spend more money to buy the fattier candy, they can. But for everybody else who's like easily turned on or off by certain price incentives, you just let them buy like the cheaper one that has less sugar. I mean, if that makes the whole country more healthy, if it makes us more productive workers, if it lessens the burden on our healthcare system, if it helps people make better decisions, I don't know. It seems like really hard to be opposed to those types of restrictive measures if they move everybody in a more positive direction.
Or we could just abolish the FDA.
I mean, we could, but the FDA is the one thing that kept us from, man, what was the drug that they sold in Europe that was causing babies to come out with like 10 heads and shit? It was super fucked, and I think it was our FDA that said we're not going to let you sell it. Somebody in chat will know the name of this drug.
Somebody help us out.
Thalidomide. I don't know how to pronounce it. Thalidomide. But yeah, that was a drug that was sold in Europe for a while that had like really nasty effects on childbirth that our FDA actually saw. I think that the FDA does do good things. I think it's pretty important to have some type of understanding of like what we're putting in our bodies, and having a third party do that rather than a company that's trying to sell me the drug is probably a good idea, I would say.
I think that there's an argument to be made for an organization like the FDA that is like, yeah, we've looked at this. This is, the outcome of these clinical trials. Yeah, you don't want that. Like we're not going to allow that to be sold in our country because of it has such horrible outcomes. But then you have the FDA saying like, no, you can't have this because it's having really, really bad birth defects. But we're going to put all these regulations on, selling the healthy food. The healthy food's going to be more expensive. So people are going to buy the cheap, crappy stuff. And we're not going to do anything about, the massive levels of, high fructose corn syrup, even though we know all the horrible things that does to children's bodies, all of these dyes, these sugars, these additives that are just being pumped into our kids' system. That is definitely the leading factor in childhood obesity. They're just sitting back and collecting the paycheck that they're getting from pushing this through and allowing this to happen.
Well, I mean, that would be like an argument in favor of like taxing some sugars more or whatever, right? Like, it's not like high fructose corn syrup. That's a sugar that goes into your body, like, like fructose or lactose or anything else. But I mean, like, it has bad impacts because people consume so much of it. But like, that would be an area where I agree. Like, the FDA could come in and be like, hey, like, if you've got like too much sugar in your food, like, you have to pay like a slightly higher tax for it to discourage the production of it. Like, the reason why these foods exist is because they're so cheap and they're so easy to create. I don't think it's because companies want to kill us. It's just because it's cheaper and easier to make tasty stuff, using massive amounts of antibiotics or hormones in animals, or, making like super sugary, cheap to eat stuff. I think it's just because it's easier to do it and it's more profitable, no?
I would agree with that. Corporations are terrible people.
Sure, yeah.
Next up, thanks for your super chat from Taliesin Oberlander. I'm a little confused on this one. Said, Destiny, also you're white.
It's
None
just
of your white, Steven.
It's just a meme in my community.
Observation.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And thanks for your. Oh, this is a fun, juicy one, and it's
boy.
probably maybe we should have this be the last one for the night, just because it's really interesting and really relevant.
Uh-huh.
So, in talking about the riots and whether or not they're justified, both of you seem to be pretty sympathetic. And in your own words, you could kind of clarify, but in particular, asking, would you also advocate for violence against state employees, whether it be police or maybe even other state employees they didn't specify? Where is the line drawn?
I'll let you take this one first. Go for it.
I draw the line at violence against other people. I do believe that violence against other human beings, maybe this is just, the pro-life activist coming out of me, but I think that violence against other human beings should be an absolute last resort. And I don't think that systematic oppression is the extreme enough where we need to be taking it out on government employees. I know there's this coming from a more impoverished area of, Philly. There are plenty of people around me that don't trust the government, don't like the government, but they work for the government because that's the only jobs that they could get at the time that they were looking for employment. There are plenty of incentives to work for the government, and for impoverished people, those incentives are sometimes worth it. And I think that, there's not a logical way to go about figuring out what government employees are either for, with you or against you whenever it comes to civil disobedience or even civil violence. You have these riots out here that stemmed from this horrible, awful, tragic death of this man. Then you go into a city like mine, and there's government employees standing on the street. Are you going to question each and every individual one to get their opinions on this man's death before you execute them? I think that there's way too much gray area whenever it comes to that to be able to logically play that out.
Gotcha. And then Stephen, if you want to respond, you can. You don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I think that there are levels of responsibility that you could probably get into. So for instance, like, I don't think I would hold like somebody that works like that does like paperwork at a police department at the same level of responsibility that I might hold like the mayor, right? So I mean, like, different arguments would obviously be tailored to the actual public official and the hand that they had in crafting some particular policy, maybe. But I think that once you start getting into, I look at more, I would look at it from a pragmatic effect and from a moral effect. Morally, you probably could justify violence against certain individuals. Like if you have a family member who literally gets killed by a police department because of a policy crafted by like a certain mayor, I mean, like you have legitimate grievances there that are pretty hard to argue against. But from a pragmatic point of view, most of the people that have these problems belong to like oppressed or minority classes. If it turns into like an all-out war or genocide, you're not going to be on the winning team. So like I don't think it's smart or good from a political point to like start killing public officials or start killing people that might be involved in this, because if we start like dishing out, like the big like violent actions, I think that like you might get a genocide there that goes in the wrong direction or whatever. Instead of like genociding bad public officials and horrible policy decisions, like people might just start killing black people on the street, indiscriminately or something. Like you have to be really careful with that, I think.
Gotcha. And with that, we'll wrap up. I want to say, I forgot to mention earlier, thanks for subscribing. Vince Vaughan, saw that pop up on the screen. Glad to have you. And also want to let everybody know there, whether you be libertarian, leaning left, gay, straight, Christian, atheist, you name it, no matter what walk of life you come from, we do hope you feel welcome here. And with that, we just want to say thanks so much for being here, hanging out with us. And thanks so much to our guests for making this a fun time. It's been a really interesting conversation. So they're linked in the description, folks. So if you're listening and you're like, I like that, you can hear plenty more where that came from by clicking on those links that I put in the description just for you. So thanks again, Stephen and Kay, for being with us tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And folks, just because we had the stream split in half, very embarrassing, we are going to basically, we'll set them both on private. I'll stitch them together and re-release this discussion and Q&A in full in one video, probably later tonight before bed or early tomorrow morning. So thanks so much for hanging out with us. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Take care, everybody. And we were off air. Thanks so much, you guys. Totally appreciate you sticking it out with us.
Yeah,
so,
thanks a lot.
Yeah, it was awesome.
All right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I had fun.
Yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.
Take care. Have a good one. Thanks again,
You
Kay.
too.
First time. It was great.
All right, good job, guys. We did it. I went back and I checked through my emails, and she sent that response back to about the media overblowing the COVID-19 stuff. So I assumed that I thought her position would be way more radical. I didn't know that. Yeah. Why? Who cares about them if they don't vote, Pixie? That's the problem that nobody understands. Nobody understands us on the left. If you don't